Japanese Gwen, reading aloud for you from my novel, The Heartbalm Effect, Book 1 in the Medicine Women of Alaska, Chapter 2. Nurse Maggie Winters rapped on his office door and peeked inside. Dr. Livingston, the new resident, has arrived. Paul set aside the lab report he'd been reading, leaned back in his chair, and pinched the bridge of his nose. How many, did you say? Just the one. We get fewer and fewer every year. I wonder sometimes why I even bother asking the medical school to send me any. I trained them and then watched them leave at the end of their residency. Please don't talk that way. Why? Do you hate my being negative? That and a practical reason as well. What's that? If you close this clinic, I'm out of a job. I'll be out of a job soon enough if we don't get more funding. Paul glanced up at her. Where is he? He's a she, and she's waiting out by the nurse's station. Okay, he reached for his eyeglasses. Let's get this over with. That's the spirit, Margie said dryly. Margie followed close on his heels as Paul walked up the hallway to the front entrance in the nurse's station. He saw her before she saw him. There she perched, the newest resident to the Gnometown Clinic, alert, ready, waiting to meet him. He fought back a wave of irritation. It was starting to get to him, this constant revolving door of residents arriving at the clinic. They did their one-year residency as if it were a prison sentence, and then abandoned the hard-scrabble little medical clinic out in the remotest part of the Alaskan wilderness. Margie interrupted his negative thoughts. Okay, there she is. Oh, he said, surprised. He recognized her instantly. The beautiful but chilly young woman he'd met 6 months earlier. He stopped stock still in the hallway and stared. Was it his imagination, or was she even more stunning than he'd remembered? Rachel perched on a stool behind the nurse's station desk. She waited with apprehension for Nurse Winters to return with Dr. Livingston. Her initial shock had worn off, and she'd grown easier when she realized the interior looked nothing like the outside. It had all the amenities of a real medical center. She cast her thoughts back to her interview with Dr. Livingston and winced with shame. She'd given off an unpleasant attitude during the interview. She hoped, by being her most professional self now, that Dr. Livingston would like her well enough to let her stay on. When she received the offer of employment in the mail, it spurred her to study up on Dr. Livingston. She'd learned a great deal concerning the hermit-like physician who ran this odd little clinic out in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. He impressed her with his tenacity and his drive. And while she didn't want to stay here any longer than necessary, she also didn't want to alienate the man. After all, I may need him as a reference when I reapply at Mayo. She'd been so disappointed when they turned her down, but her academic advisor suggested she go ahead and take her year's training out in Gnometown and reapply at Mayo after she'd gained a year's experience. If she got hired on at Mayo, she'd reassure her parents she wasn't throwing her medical career away by accepting a position at a second-rate clinic. I've got a lot riding on this. I can't afford to blow it. Even so, the place was sadly run down. She glanced up at the peeling paint on the concrete walls and her spirits plummeted. Heck, This place was easily a third or fourth best kind of place. It'd have to put on a lot of spit and polish just to get a second place ranking. Her dad, a top ranked surgeon at Omaha Memorial Hospital, had been horrified at her abdication from the family firm. Dad had promised her a coveted position at the hospital if only she joined the ranks, but she'd wanted to make it on her own terms. Unfortunately, doing things on her own terms wasn't working out as well as she'd hoped. Better not tell Dad anything at all, at least not until after she got onto the staff at Mayo. She heard footsteps and cut her musings short. She jumped off the stool and craned her neck to watch as Nurse Winters returned with Dr. Livingston. She had only a moment to absorb the features and build of the tall, surprisingly handsome man in a white lab coat as he stepped forward, his right hand extended for a handshake. "Well, hello there," he said. "I'm Paul Livingston, and you must be Dr. Lavange." "I am," she said, smiling shyly as Dr. Livingston shook her hand with a strong grip. Why didn't I remember how good-looking he is? He towered over her, easily 6 feet tall, and with not an ounce of extra fat on his lean frame. His grip told her muscles rippled beneath the crisp white lab coat, and she'd never in her life seen a man with such luxurious black hair, nor such warm brown eyes. Mesmerized, she gazed up into his eyes a moment longer than good manners called for before recollecting herself. She released his hand and stood before him with her hands at her sides. "Welcome to my clinic." He made an improvisational gesture to indicate the foyer and the hallways leading out from this central position in the clinic. "It's small, to be sure, but we're only 5 years old, and we're constantly looking for funding to make additional improvements to the facility." Nurse Winters winced. What's going on there, I wonder? What did Dr. Livingston mean when he said they were constantly looking for funding? Was it his euphemistic way of saying the clinic ran on a shoestring budget? A thread of worry laced through her heart. Did she make a mistake in coming here? She wondered how it'd look on her resume. She might ask her dad for some advice after all. See what he said. Perhaps she ought to flee this place right now and take the position offered her at Fairbanks Memorial. She'd gotten an acceptance letter to the pediatric oncology unit, but it came after she'd said yes to Gnometown. Could she go back on her word? I wonder if I can. Dr. Livingston appeared to be waiting for a response. What in the world ought she to say? Oh, I see. Shall we take a look around? Yes, that would be fine. After all, he said wryly, that's the whole reason you came here, right? Well, I've got to finish my residency somewhere, so it may as well be here. Now it was his turn to wince. Her cheeks flared hot. Oh, Dane, why in the world did I say that? That's what I call a ringing endorsement. He might be handsome as all get out, but he was also an incredibly angry man. She'd give him plenty of space. Oh, geez, she glanced at Nurse Winters. I'm sorry. He turned away and stalked down the first hallway nearest to the nurse's station. All right, let's do the walk and talk and get this over with. Incandescent with shame, she followed behind him, noting the rigidity of his shoulders, the way his sharp steps reflected his temper. Nurse Winters winked at her and mouthed a silent, "It's okay." But she sure didn't feel okay. As a matter of fact, she felt rotten.